With 6 major documentaries covering SpaceX out there in the media landscape, where exactly do you even start? If you want to understand the history, the crazy engineering feats, and those wild future visions of one of the world's most revolutionary companies, just staring at a screen full of streaming options can feel, well, completely overwhelming. It's the classic paralysis of choice. You're scrolling through thumbnails, wondering, am I about to watch a highly polished, Oscar-winning cinematic masterpiece, or am I about to get a gritty, unscripted tour of a greasy factory floor? You want to actually learn the mechanics of how they pulled it off, but you absolutely don't want to waste your time on overlapping information. Well, you're in the right place, because this explainer is going to be your definitive guide to navigating the incredibly crowded landscape of SpaceX content. Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to our explainer on what I honestly like to call the SpaceX cinematic universe. The truth is, there is an absurd amount of footage out there chronicling this company's multi-decade journey. So we've gone ahead and done the heavy lifting for you. We've watched the hundreds of hours of footage, we've combed through all those overlapping narratives, and we've distilled the absolute best viewing options down into a structured, focused visual guide. By the end of this, you won't just know what to watch, you're going to know exactly which documentary to queue up based on the specific era, the engineering challenges, or just the level of technical depth you really want to explore. So here is our roadmap for today. It's pretty simple. We'll start by mapping out the cinematic universe. Then we'll look at the high stakes and hard failures. Third, we'll cover reusability and NASA. And finally, the ultimate goal, Mars.
All right, part 1, the cinematic universe and mapping the content. Out of the literally dozens of specials, news segments, and series produced over the last 20 years, our research has actually distilled the essential viewing down to exactly 6 major works. And there's a very specific reason these 6 made the cut. They offer unprecedented, unfiltered access. They manage to cut right through that usual corporate PR spin and literally drop you directly into the room where the critical decisions were being made. It gives you a truly comprehensive look at the company's past, present, and future.
Now, these 6 works essentially split into 2 very distinct viewing experiences, and your starting point really depends entirely on what kind of story you want to consume. On the mainstream side, you have your highly polished productions. Take Netflix's Return to Space, for example. It was directed by Oscar-winning filmmakers Jimmy Chin and Elizabeth Chai Vazirheli. So you're getting vertigo-inducing cinematography, sweeping orchestral scores, the whole shebang, a beautifully crafted narrative arc. The same goes for Disney Plus's Mars Inside SpaceX, Prime Video's NASA and SpaceX Journey to the Future, and the really extensive BBC Two series The Elon Musk Show. These are films explicitly designed to make you feel the emotional weight of spaceflight. But then you have the behind-the-scenes category, and man, this is where it gets incredibly raw. You have self-produced releases like Tests Like You Fly, or the legendary Starbase tours produced by space communicator Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut. Dodd's videos are effectively unscripted engineering deep dives. We are talking about him wearing a hard hat, literally walking around an active construction site with Elon Musk for 3 hours, just geeking out over fluid dynamics, valve designs, and rocket plumbing. There's no dramatic music there, just the ambient noise of a factory churning out rocket parts. So, cinematic drama or raw engineering, the choice is completely yours.
Moving into part 2, high stakes and hard failures, the early days.
Across almost all of these historical documentaries, researchers noted this massive, reoccurring theme: the razor-thin margin between SpaceX's survival and bankruptcy. The mainstream films masterfully capture a very specific moment in 2008 that is honestly hard to fathom today. Elon Musk was literally splitting his last remaining funds between a struggling Tesla and a failing SpaceX. He was days away from both companies going entirely bankrupt. He was sleeping on factory floors, basically having to choose which of his children to save. Capturing that visceral desperation, where just one blown valve meant the absolute end of the entire commercial space stream, that is a major, major focus of these historical retrospectives.
And the reality of that desperation becomes crystal clear when you look at the early Falcon 1 launches. We are talking about 3 consecutive explosions over a grueling 3-year period. But what the documentaries reveal, specifically that BBC Two series, The Elon Musk Show, is the absurd reality of where this was all happening. They weren't launching from some gleaming modern spaceport. They were out on the remote Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. It was basically a rusting tropical island. You've got engineers sweating through their shirts, battling salty ocean air that was literally corroding the rocket components, dealing with total logistical nightmares. At one point, they practically staged a mutiny over a lack of food until a helicopter finally dropped off frozen sausages. You can't make this stuff up. That was the backdrop for these 3 brutal, near-fatal failures. It's just a gripping story of sheer human endurance.
Which brings us to part 3, reusability and NASA.
the big turnaround.
And this brilliantly illustrates the turnaround, which really centers on the engineering marvel shown across all these films, the pivot to reusability. The concept of taking a skyscraper-sized orbital rocket booster, falling from space at supersonic speeds and landing it perfectly on a drone ship in the middle of the ocean, that was widely considered an impossible dream. Industry veterans straight up laughed at the idea. In fact, the documentaries point out that when they finally nailed that first landing, the footage looked so incredibly sci-fi that people on the internet genuinely accused them of just playing a launch video in reverse. No way it was real, right? Today, it's a completely routine event, and witnessing that evolution on film is a defining technological triumph.
Now, if you want to dive deep into how this proven technology was finally applied to human spaceflight, you really need to direct your attention to Netflix's Return to Space and Prime Video's NASA and SpaceX Journey to the Future. Both of these films focus heavily on the Commercial Crew Program and the historic Demo 2 mission. And what they capture so brilliantly is the massive shift in culture. You know, for years, if a SpaceX rocket blew up, sure, they lost metal and they lost money. But for Demo 2, astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley were strapped in. The documentaries capture this electric, absolutely palpable terror in the control room. It's a profound look at the agonizing responsibility of putting human lives on top of a controlled explosion just to return human spaceflight to American soil.
But here's the thing. None of that triumph happens without the relationship framed perfectly by these documentaries. NASA was a critical lifeline. They were not just a customer. The films highlight what was literally a Christmas miracle: the 2008 NASA Commercial Resupply Services contract. It was a $1.6 billion lifeline that came through just 2 days before Christmas, pulling SpaceX back from the absolute abyss of bankruptcy following all those island failures we talked about. NASA wasn't just buying rides, they were stepping in as the ultimate partner, effectively funding the survival and the subsequent dominance of the entire commercial space industry. And that leads us to Part 4, the ultimate goal, Mars. Looking forward.
Pretty much everything SpaceX has done has been a stepping stone toward the overarching vision of making life multiplanetary. For this forward-looking vision, your go-to sources provide an incredible temporal contrast. Over on Disney+, you have Julia Reagan's Mars Inside SpaceX from back in 2018. This shows you the early theoretical struggles. You see engineers at whiteboards, carbon fiber tanks being tested and occasionally exploding in fields. It was pure, raw determination. Contrast that with SpaceX's own highly polished 2026 releases, Tests Like You Fly and Critical Path. Here, the theories have turned into reality. You are watching 400-foot-tall stainless steel behemoths actually clearing launch towers. The evolution from whiteboard concepts to massive, building-sized hardware taking flight is just staggering to watch. Test Like You Fly actually takes you inside the Starbase factories to explain exactly why this next phase is quite possibly history's most difficult engineering challenge. Because they aren't just building a new rocket, they are building the machine that builds the machine. The documentary details this radical shift to stainless steel construction in a South Texas shipyard. It explores the staggering complexity of the Raptor engines, which, by the way, operate at pressures that would literally melt standard metals. They have had to completely invent a new ship, a new booster, new engines, and an entirely new pad equipped with massive mechanical arms just to catch the rocket right out of the sky. It showcases this relentless, monstrous industrial ramp-up aimed at total, rapid reusability. The cinematic universe covering this company is only going to grow as their ambitions reach further and further into the solar system. Think about it. We've watched them battle starvation and mutiny on a remote atoll. We've watched them conquer Earth's orbit with routine sci-fi-esque landings. And we're currently watching massive stainless steel starships being rapidly iterated down in South Texas. Now that you have the ultimate viewer's guide, you know exactly where to start streaming. But it leaves us with one incredibly provocative thought to consider. We have watched the entire history of this company unfold on Earth. Will the ultimate SpaceX documentary be filmed by a crew already standing on the surface of Mars?